right, guys, so, wow, it's not spray booth. So many of you, especially with sculptural objects, you know, even if you can pour and dip, sometimes they're just awkward and you don't feel like you're enough in control of that for certain types of fragile work that you might want to glaze, or, you know, and also the control is very different when you come to something like a spray booth. So the spray booth, you may have used spray booths in your life. This one is pretty easy. There are certain safety protocols that must be observed. The most important thing about the spray booth is this button, this arrow. It turns on the venting system. Before anything leaves this, that has to be on. Imagine that what you're spraying in the air is toxic not only for you, but it hangs there for anyone passing through this room for hours. Okay, so we really, really mean it. This usually is just for cleaning. It's an air thing. So when you want to add or subtract from the hose, from the compressor, this brass couplet just gets pulled back, and you can pop it off, and it gets pulled back, and something gets popped back on. Sometimes if you're the first one in the day, the compressor has not been turned on yet, and you can see Jason about that. But you can always see, based on the gauge, if there's air in it. It should be about 40. What is the reading on it? 40 something?
It also looks like it's closed right now.
Mm-hmm. It looks like what?
It's closed right now.
It does look like that, but it's not. Because I just heard the air. Probably the sign is backwards. Okay, so we often have the spray gun parts hanging by the whisks. If you don't find them there, they're kept in our caged area. You can check them out. You know, that's why we give you the sticker after the safety protocol. But it's very easy to get access to one. These are also almost always on the windowsill drying, and these are the reservoirs. So it's just very basic, you know, it's just like a can thing. I stirred the glaze first and then put a portion in. You could use other materials under glaze. We prefer you not to transfer underglaze. It's a lot of waste ends up happening in this. If you want to buy your own jars of underglaze for a project and spray them, that's probably better. Getting it to fit straight. It's a little fussy, especially when they're dirty. Should have probably cleaned that. Okay. Huh. There, I might win, let's see. Oh, okay. So, let me get this attached. Again, I'm going to pull this back. I always have such trouble with this. I'm not sure why.
This is the air just explodes.
It's leaking, but I know if I were to get Jason over here, he'd go boop, and it always looks like I can't do it. I think I just feel the awkwardness of the weight. Sorry guys, hold on. Step on. This is working. So, I didn't bring it up. So obviously it's very loud. If I were going to do spraying of a hollow form and inside and out, inside first again, okay? Like other, give me some, you know, you have to turn it off. the rhythm of spraying, and everyone's had these spraying issues where you're too close and you get a drip. Same with here. To get to that dime thickness, really, I need a little bit of waiting between to let there be more of a drier thing that I can keep building on. You can't just keep flooding this with the water and expect it's going to build a thicker coating. Okay, so it is a little bit of a rhythm of build up. So let's say that I want to do multiple sprayed glazes. So I should have kept that on there. Okay. So one trick about cleaning this quickly is that clean water. Bring it over here. So any unused glaze can get put back in the main container of our shop glaze, those yellow buckets. So if I keep it on the air and I just put it in the clean water, it cleans it really quickly to clean. Then I can change over. So it's kind of nice also to be able to do subtle gradations of layering. So it's not these graphic, flooded edges that butt up and meet, but there's this really subtle gradation and build up. So you can get great nuance and subtlety using the glaze materials by spraying. Of course, sometimes, if you ever use an airbrush, it can also look like it was sprayed, which is like the canvas on your slab, right? We leave it for the sculpture. We want to, we want the magic to come forward. So we want a craft issue to get in the way. Like that. Okay. So I'm going to take this off. So when you're cleaning this, when you're cleaning up here for the next person, this one, because it has iron, might need a sponge. It's an annoying sound to me. You can hang it here with its original attachment on it. This is, we ask you to bring a bucket of water and a big sponge and clean the wheel, and anything from the bar forward, and the rest can be left, okay, with all the residue from your spray. All right, so now, questions. You had a question about multiple firing? Shoot.
It's about multiple firing.
Okay, so many times, because of the variables, especially when you're getting to know your materials, you're going to say, I love this one moment, but boy, do I want to make a change to this. Okay, that's very common. And the one way people make changes once they've fired the glaze on is they do another firing. So you might say, well, okay, do I just put the original material on and fire it again? So when you do that, what happens is all the original material that you did for the first firing remelts and changes again. And the new stuff that you added melts for the first time and then chemically reacts with the underpainting to make another unmelt. Okay, so it's not necessarily, you might fix the thing that you want to fix and open up another thing you don't like, right? Very typically, people that multiple fire at glaze temperatures fire their highest firing first, and then have materials that they fire at lower temperatures. So the original material doesn't fully remelt to make more passive chemistry between the stuff they've added.
Okay.
Does that answer?
Yes.
In our studio, you have two glaze material bodies. We have the main one, the higher temperature, and a few lower fire glazes that can be second fire on top of it. Bear in mind, the concepts glazes could be added on a high fire glaze and refired at a low temperature to fuse at a low glaze temperature, as well as these. All right, so there are a few things to play with glaze temperatures. Does anybody else have a question?
So we ask for a low fire. Is it something we can request?
You can just access it. It's these buckets with the orange tops.
Yeah.
And there should be some fire tiles. There's just a few of them.
But when we go to fire, is it low fire?
There's a shelf for low fire.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. It's not the primary way people are firing here, but it's a regular way. So on Mondays and Thursdays, those low fire objects are loaded in their appropriate counts of fire as well. Yeah.
I have a few questions.
Okay, a few questions, good.
So the low fire, you can put it in low fire and then add a high fire glaze on top and fire it again high fire.
You could, but the issue with that is whatever you were expecting out of the low fire would have been taken way past its melting point and overfired.
And that'll just make the
It's hard to predict. You might get the most brilliant ceramic surface in 40,000 years of ceramic history by overfiring a low fire glaze, or you might get something you're really unhappy with. So, I recommend if you have a brilliant idea of something I haven't covered or something, do it and just see. Just make a test. The best thing to do is to get it out like a physical test to see. Most times it won't leave a residue of mess that will harm something. But if you're worried about things flowing too far, which often happens when they're overfired with glaze, do it on the inside of a bowl, so if it flows too much, it flows in on itself instead of off into a shelf.
And the vice versa, you do the high fire first and then the low fire glaze on top.
Yes, you fire high, you do a bisque, you do your high fire glazing, you do a high fire glaze firing, then you add low fire glaze on top, and then you do a second glaze firing at that lower temperature. And then you can keep going with materials that fire at lower than glaze temperatures. And that's something we'll talk about another time. So, the tricky part is glazing an object that's sealed with fired glaze, because there's no place for the water and the raw material to absorb into. You saw us trying to, when you were dipping that fire cut with glaze, it didn't absorb. So there's some technical things about getting enough of a coating to stick. But that's a whole other conversation we can have at another time. Maybe we'll have a second glaze fire talk where we can go through some of those things.
And I have one more question.
Yeah.
Say you just have one dime-sized layer of glaze, and you put it through, and then what if you just put it through again the second time? What's going to happen?
Well, it may come out looking like nothing happened, but believe me, something does happen. The clay goes through all of the stress, again, and the glaze remelts if you fired it to the same temperature. It will become fluid again. And in that moment, gravity's acting on it, so it moves more. So you will see changes, subtle changes usually. But some glazes look like they didn't, but some will be dramatically different, and some will be subtly different. Yeah. Anybody else have a question for me? Yes.
I have a question on the alumina.
Yes.
There's a glaze on the shelf that looks like a crackle, almost.
Okay.
And would that suggest that there's less alumina, or is there another additive that makes that crackle?
It is something you can take a glaze recipe and play with materials to get to that. What that speaks of is shrinkage.
Okay.
Just like your clay is shrinking when it's drying, and then in the firing it keeps shrinking and getting denser, and the changes. When the glaze shrinks too. And when the glaze shrinks at an incompatible rate to the clay, it crackles. And that crackling is called crazing. And that can a glaze, when it's first pulled out of the kiln, might look like no crackle, and over time, with the freeze and the thaw, or cold and hot. Have you ever seen a teacup that gets a web of stained tea crackling, that's because it was cooled and heated, and it starts to shrink the clay and the glaze to make a difference that causes that crackling. So it's not a structural cracking, but it will allow for staining, like tea or coffee. Some people like to take something that's been fired with a crackle and then put a permanent India ink stain into the crackle to make a colored system, visual system. You wouldn't do that on a functional piece, you'd do it on a sculptural piece. So you can better believe that the highest paid ceramic engineers in the world that IKEA hires from their factories in China are spending a lot of time solving the problem of crazing. They don't want anything to ever craze because they're making mass-produced functional ceramic items. Right. But for us, we love it.
We love it.
Yeah. We'll take it. Yeah, we'll take your crazing IKEA. Yeah.
One more question. Can you add flux to glaze to kind of alter it?
You can. Some simple ways to do that. I mean, you can get into glaze. I mean, I would recommend all of you with the interest take our clay and glazes class, which you can take for grad credit. And it is an examination of your materials on a level where you get to design your own clay bodies and glazes, and it's a very cool class, and it's offered this spring. But the colorant, the metal colorants, at our temperature are all fluxes. So by adding a strip of cobalt on top of a glaze, you're going to see flow that didn't happen from the metal interacting with the chemistry of the glaze. So that's one thing, but you can encourage fluxing with layering of thicknesses too. It encourages more of the flow, or the fluxing, the movement, I should say. Yeah. Anybody else? All right, so where we are is, next week I'm going to do a demo of